Okay, so I'm going to talk about Thomas Kuhn's paradigm shifts. Thomas Kuhn was a 20th century philosopher of science. Well, I guess I should say he's still alive. But a philosopher of science, and his notion of scientific revolutions is actually credited with popularizing the word paradigm. So, Kuhn had this model of scientific development, and basically what he said was that a science it started off as a loose group of activities, frequently organized into competing schools, and it becomes, sort of this cohesive practice when one of the models that this loosely associated group of activities works with provides a good example of what it means to perform good research qua a participant in those activities. And so eventually what Kuhn says is that these exemplary cases begin to constitute a paradigm, and that paradigm dictates how we do what Kuhn refers to as normal science. But based on the nature of science as Kuhn presents it, scientific research is just so concise and so penetrating that basically something anomalous is going to come up sooner or later. And then when the top scientists in the field, or the scientific community in general, when they fail to account for these anomalies on the current paradigm, this kicks into motion what Kuhn describes as a paradigm shift, which is actually how I have generally heard Kuhn's ideas referred to rather than scientific revolutions, though of course they both make reference to the same thing. Anyway, so this paradigm shift, what happens is eventually some of the scientists in the field, they will start rejecting the paradigm. They're going to say, well, we really can't account for it. We can't account for this new thing that we've discovered to be the case, so I think we have to reject this paradigm. And now, actually, as it stands, normal science has an incentive to discourage research, to discourage the notion of, I want to say discourage the discovery of these anomalies, but Kuhn thinks that actually the thing that is most likely to kickstart a scientific revolution is just doing science the way we would consider it to be normally done, because as I've said, as Kuhn says, basically what happens is just the nature of scientific practice is just, it's basically, for Kuhn, there's no question that an anomalous event is going to turn up. So basically, normal science is incentivized to sort of stamp out any sort of idea that would necessitate a paradigm shift. It's going to fail, though, and during this period of time, it's possible for other methodologies or precepts to be entertained, and some scientists are going to adopt one or more of these new alternatives, and that is what Kuhn says constitutes a paradigm shift, a Kuhnian scientific revolution. And so what happens now, Kuhn says, is that the two paradigms are going to become incommensurable. Because paradigm shifts don't typically come with a deluge of new results, but what they do is they change the goals scientists have, they change the scientists' perceptions of the world and of the way that science ought to be done, and they change the language that scientists use. So eventually, the paradigms become incommensurable. The scientists cannot, two scientists who abide by two different paradigms cannot communicate with each other effectively. It's going to be very hard to, if I'm trying to tell someone something, and I believe in a geocentric theory, and they believe in a heliocentric theory. Basically, we're not going to be able to communicate effectively at all. It's like having a philosophical disagreement with someone and exchanging your ideas, but without resolving any axiomatic disagreement that you both may have. You're never going to get anywhere if you do philosophy like that. And and so a paradigm shift and the period of time in which some of the scientists they believe this one paradigm and others have rejected it, science for a while is like that. But Kuhn says that this period is brief. Nevertheless, this incommensurability of science demonstrates that the ideas we have about what is or can be scientifically valid or true aren't really this sort of objective, rational thing, but rather they these notions of scientific validity or scientific truth come to exist based on the consensus of the scientific community, which means that there is a certain sense in which science is relative. And Kuhn's ideas about the nature of scientific progress and scientific development are incredibly damaging to those who view science as something that builds on itself and accumulates, but that those who hold that science develops in such a way that it develops towards some sort of ultimate truth about the universe. And this was the view of, this was the Enlightenment account of science, and it was the way that a lot of major philosophers had viewed science, the philosophy of science, for a while. This is what the logical positivists believed. This is what Karl Popper believed. And if Kuhn's ideas are true, this is very threatening to that notion of science. And so now we have a problem to resolve, wherein basically we have to provide a new account of scientific progress, because if Kuhn is right, this old model of building, towards this sort of ultimate, here's how we properly and objectively understand the universe, isn't going to hold anymore. But rather than come to the conclusion that, there is no such thing as scientific progress, what Kuhn says is that his notion of paradigm shifts doesn't require us to drop a notion of scientific progress. Kuhn thinks that scientific progress is a real thing, but what it necessitates is a reevaluation of our understanding of what scientific progress is. Basically, what Kuhn says is something akin to what Manuel Vargas says in the opening of his chapter in Four Views on Free Will. Vargas says that when we discovered that water was H2O, we didn't say that water wasn't real. And so Kuhn says something very similar for science. And what Kuhn says is that scientific progress is still a thing, but rather than conceptualizing it as a process by which we sort of move towards the ultimate systematic objective truth, what Kuhn says is that we can think of it like evolution. It moves away from what it used to be, and in that sense, there is a progression. It's been said that it's a little odd that Kuhn chose specifically evolution, because evolution is usually used in contrast with revolution. But what we see in biology, Stephen Jay Gould's notion of punctuated equilibrium is actually very, very similar to this, that, species are in stasis for a while, and then we see this period of rapid change. And so Kuhn says his work predates that of Stephen Jay Gould and that other guy whose name never gets remembered. But that is Thomas Kuhn's account of scientific progress, scientific development, and paradigm shifts.